Good morning and welcome to Future of London's Achieving Net Zero launch event online. Very delighted you can join us. We're just going to spend a few moments waiting for everyone else to come and join us into the room. We are actually very delighted to be able to do this as a digital event. Usually we have a room full of about 120 people. We're probably going to end up with about double that number. So really happy that you can join us and looking forward to your questions and finding out where you're dialing in from, your organisations that you work for. Before we start, really while we're just waiting for some more people to join us, should acknowledge the fact that we're working obviously and living in very extraordinary times at the moment. The way we communicate, the way we are working, our travel is completely changed. And that obviously is affecting the climate, but it's too early to say which of these behaviours we're going to carry forward. So we've tasked our panelists and briefed them to talk about their plans to date and what they've been working on, and we'll be guided by your Q&As as to what degree you want to talk about coronavirus and the pandemic and what the future holds. So that's just worth bearing in mind. So I think we're going to make a start now. So a very warm welcome. My name is Nicola Mathers. I'm CEO of Future of London. I'm going to be taking us through this morning. Welcome to the launch of Achieving Net Zero, our major programme for this year. And this event is Council and the Climate Change Emergency. I'd like at this point to thank our sponsors, obviously, for making this possible. So Arup Landsec, Montague Evans, and Pollard Thomas Edwards Architects, who we're going to hear from in a little while. So our agenda, what we're going to take you through this morning then is I'm just going to give you a little bit of background to the programme. We're going to hear two panels, one from our public sector colleagues on how they're approaching the climate change emergency, and then following on a reaction and a response from our private sector sponsors on how they're supporting the public boroughs in terms of how they're achieving their net zero programmes. There's obviously going to be an opportunity for you to get involved as well. So we're going to be doing Q&As after each panel. But throughout the event, we'd really like to engage you in social media as well. So we'll be tweeting from @FutureLDN. We encourage you to use the hashtag #NetZeroLDN as well. So just a little bit of background about the programme before we start with the panel. So Achieving Net Zero, why do we choose this topic? Because when we talked to our members and our partners, you remember this was last year, this was on the top of their agenda and one of their top key concerns. If you remember 2018, we had the coldest winter on record, the hottest summer on record. Last year, we had children going on strike from school. We had people risking arrest to protest. So it's a huge, huge issue, but it's obviously a massive topic. 26 London boroughs have declared a climate emergency, as has the Mayor of London. And there's a lot of work around this area. So what are we going to focus on at Future of London? We're going to look at London as a global city. We're then going to take that down and think about what the boroughs are doing at a strategic level. So what's in and out of their strategies, how are they approaching them, what's their timescales? And then we're going to be looking at actually what the projects on the ground and hopefully taking you to some of those projects a bit later on in the year. We want to tackle some of the tough questions like how do we pay for all of this? How does the public and private sector work together? So hence the event today, and that's what we'll start exploring. But also really importantly, thinking about the themes that run across this, not thinking in silos, but thinking how does planning and regeneration and housing and health and education all work as one? So we've set ourselves as some really ambitious targets, but it's a great programme and we hope that you'll stay with us throughout the 9 months, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. There are obviously lots of questions around how we achieve net zero, but there are some things that we're very, very clear about. And I'm just going to go through those before we start the panel. So one is this is a global issue. Just move this, sorry. It's a global issue. So we know that if we do nothing, will it be in the scenario where we're having an over 4-degree increase in global temperatures, but we do have targets and policies that will get us to make sure that that temperature range is no more than 2.5%. We know this is a London issue. This map shows that if we do the do nothing scenario, this is how much of London is going to be underwater in the next 80 years. So although that's thinking about the future, actually this is impacting us now. In 2015, 80% of Londoners felt overheating in their homes. And I'm feeling that personally. I live in southwest London next to the River Wandle. Last year, my insurance premiums went up 600%. So we're really feeling this now. So it's really, really urgent that we start making progress. And that's what this program is all about, sharing what people are doing and what they're prioritising. This is also a local issue. So this shows you the target dates for each individual boroughs who are heading towards net zero and carbon neutral. And that is obviously showing you that boroughs are taking different approaches. They're all working in different contexts. They'll have different levels of ambition, of timescales, of challenges, of opportunities. And there's an amazing opportunity, a rich opportunity to learn from all of these different approaches happening across London. And that's really what our programme is about bringing the public and the private sector together, thinking about cross disciplines and really learning from each other about how we move towards London's sustainable future. So that takes us to today. We've got two questions. The first one is, what does climate change emergency mean for the public sector? And the second panel in response to that is how our private sector partners are working with us and how we can work together. We'd really like to get you involved, obviously. And so throughout the presentations, you can send us your questions. You can see the Q&A button at the bottom of your toolbar now. If it's really important, if you can tell us your name and your organisation so we can credit you for your question, but also who you're directing your question at, which panel member you're directing your question at. Okay, so I think we should make a start. So panel one, what does the climate change emergency mean for the public sector? We've got 4 great presenters who are going to talk to you about what they're doing and what they're prioritising in terms of achieving net zero. We're going to start with Harold Garner from Camden, and if you're working in this area, you'll know that Camden are really leading the way. Harold will be followed by Hannah Jameson from Lambeth, then Gareth Jones from Hounslow and Diana Lott from Optivo. And we've invited Bevan Jones to then come in and do a summary and a sort of summing up of the points that people have raised in the presentations. Then we'll open it up for Q&A. So I'm now going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to invite Harold to share his screen and start his presentation.
Coming. Can you see this okay?
Yep, you're good to go.
Great, here we go. So thanks everyone, nice to speak to you all. I'm going to talk a bit about Camden's approach to the climate emergency. I'm Harold Garner, Head of Sustainability at Camden. It's not new for us in Camden. So since 2010, we've been taking a lot of climate action. We've got a 10-year plan called Green Action for Change that was launched in 2010 and set a 40% borough-wide carbon reduction target. It also set a 40% target for our own estate and operations. And so across our own estate and operations, we've now achieved a 44% reduction. And that's through projects like investor save carbon reduction initiatives such as Somerstown Energy, which is the district energy project we've built in Somerstown that connects 550 homes to a new district energy centre. There's a photo of the energy centre retrofitted into the basement of that building on the screen. Borough-wide emissions have fallen by 39%. That's 2018 stats, and they come from government. There's an 18-month delay on the government stats. Across the borough, 65% of emissions come from the commercial sector. So one of the first things we did was to establish a business network called the Camden Climate Change Alliance, which has 300 members, businesses, third sector organisations, schools, who each report annual emissions reductions and are supported by us to reduce their emissions. And 89% of those members report year-on-year emissions reductions. So really good progress through the Alliance network. The grid decarbonisation has also played a huge role in emissions reduction, and it's also implying a change of focus. So this screen, the pie chart on the left shows emissions by fuel use in 2005, a big focus on electricity. And as the grid has decarbonised, so we're really seeing no coal in the mix now, the whole focus is going to shift to the residual gas that's left. So heat becomes a real focus as we move towards a zero carbon London. And transport remains pretty stable too as an issue for us. So there's a real shift in focus. And you can see that in this study that we produced to try to understand how we could get to a zero carbon Camden by 2030. And it became really obvious how challenging this was. So you can see this whole thing about electrification of heat. So 60% of Camden's heat would need to be supplied by heat pumps by 2030 at a deployment rate of 7,000 a year. There'd be no gas boilers from 2022. There'd be huge electric vehicle penetration across Camden as well. And that's just to get us to a 67% reduction. And the cost is an additional almost £1 billion. So significant. To get to zero carbon Camden, the grid won't be zero carbon by 2030, we don't think. So we'd need to offset emissions that were still coming through the national grid. So, you know, broad calculations suggest that we'd need almost 60% of Camden's surface area covered with solar PV just to offset that residual carbon. So, you know, big challenges. But that's the sort of infrastructure picture, and you probably have heard presentations like that before from local government officers about insulation and retrofit and the rollout and numbers and scale of carbon reduction. But what that missed, I think, was this connection with people. And so last summer, we held the UK's first citizens' assembly on the climate crisis, which was a way of really trying to about how we could address the challenge. So I guess it also chimed very much with the whole sort of Extinction Rebellion movement and the Greta Thunberg of kind of bringing people back in to the mix. And politicians, I think, saw it as an opportunity to, you know, I think in a post-Brexit way, you know, connect with citizens. So The Guardian covered it, and you can see their headline on their first piece on this was, "Can it help fix democracy too?" So we had a very broad range of people who turned up to the assembly who, you know, reflected the sort of broad lived experiences of Camden residents and also closely matched the demographic profile of the borough. And they designed a new environmental plan for Camden, which I'll come on to in a second. I mean, the key thing I think about it from a political point of view was that because there was this demographic mix, it wasn't just the old green groups designing the policy or telling politicians this is what they wanted. So the politicians consequently felt so much more confidence in the positions that were coming out of the assembly. They felt they could back them and endorse them. And indeed, that's what happened. So the assembly members brought their 17 proposals, which you can see on this slide, to a full council meeting in October. And the proposals were universally endorsed across all parties, and are now beginning to form a new climate action plan for Camden, which will be adopted in June if the cabinet meeting goes ahead, which I think it will. But you can see the kind of mix of ideas, proposals that came through here. So some of them were things that we were already doing, like introducing more segregated cycle lanes. Some of them were incredibly complex. So all council properties to be fossil fuel free by 2030, developers to fund energy efficiency retrofits to old buildings. And then there was this new focus on people. So you can see that there are actions about mobilizing community groups to take climate action and better public information from the council on the climate crisis. There was this whole thing also about, you know, encouraging low carbon dietary choices and making carbon reduction fun. So all of these kind of people-centric things that historically we've not really focused on became to the fore. And of course, they're all about scope 3 emissions, which is something that councils have not looked at so much in the past. So where we are now, I guess, is over these three kind of areas. So that, as I said, the climate action plan will be adopted in June. We are very focused on delivery. So since October, since the full council meeting, we've developed a deal to extend Somers Town Energy, our district energy project, to a new residential development in the King's Cross area. We've community funded, community share funded a new solar array on Hampstead School in the north of Camden. We've done some quick wins too, so we switched all our electricity to green supplies for all of our schools and all of our corporate estate. And we've just procured a new LED street lighting contract that will see all of Camden street lights moving to LED over the next 2 years. We're also looking at design and development. So we've got 2 megawatt solar, a state-based project just going through procurement at the moment. We're doing a study into how we can transition some of our schools to be zero carbon by 2030 whilst respecting the investments that's been made in those schools to date. We're also working with Lend-Lease, who are the developer partner for Euston, to see to what extent we can, through the planning regime, kind of bring benefit from their development into local estates to see if we can retrofit local estates on the back of the Euston development. But there's also still this really big focus on participation. So in response to mobilizing community groups, we set up this Think and Do pop-up climate shop. There's a picture on a screen on the right. And this became a kind of place where the community started to curate their own series of climate talks for Camden, workshops, and 11 big projects have come out of it, like tree planting and bicycle repair shops. And during COVID, it's actually become a place which has transitioned now. So it's showing how community resilience can really help. So it's now a place where there's food distribution going on from Think and Do to the local community in Kentish Town. We've still got a series of talks there going on. So they're all now on Zoom. So this one at the bottom here was from earlier in the week, which is about food growing. So I think just a final point is how this shift from the sort of infrastructure to the people has secured and just shows how important that will be for resilience, how important it is for resilience. So important now under COVID, and I'm sure will be important too in the future. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you so much, Harold. That just gives you an idea of the actual scale of the task ahead, but incredible that the people are obviously completely behind that movement. So I'm going to invite you to stop sharing your screen now, and we're going to move to Hannah Jameson, who's going to talk to us about what they're doing south of the river in Lambeth. So Hannah, if you could share your screen now, please. That's it. So Hannah is leading on Lambeth's work on the climate change emergency and sustainable development. She's previously worked as the borough's head of partnerships and strategy. Yeah, sorry, Harold, could we just get you to stop sharing your screen? That would be good. That's brilliant. And then, okay, we can hear you.
I think his screen's still sharing.
Okay.
Okay, we'll try again.
That's good. Okay. If you could, yeah, try sharing your screen now, Hannah. Thank you. Brilliant. Here we go. It's always going to be a bit. Okay, over to you, Hannah. Tell us about what you're doing in Lambeth.
Good, thank you very much, Nicola, and thanks to Harold as well, who Camden's work has certainly helped a lot of other boroughs. They have a lot of experience that we've all learned from. And I think if there's one point that I want to get across in the next few minutes talking about the climate emergency and what it means for the public sector, it's really the scale of the challenge that it has posed to us particularly over the last 12 months and continues to pose. And I want to talk a little bit about three aspects of that challenge and how we've responded to it, some of our thinking around the kind of political challenge, the leadership challenge and the systems challenge, and some of the things we're thinking about in response to those. So if I just start with the political challenge, I mean, you picked up from some of Harold's comments that we declared a climate emergency around 12 months ago, one of the first boroughs, very much in response to a groundswell of bottom-up pressure. And that's a really interesting thing for local government to experience. This is a global crisis, as Nicola set out at the beginning, but local authorities and municipalities, cities across the world have been identified as the site for action. And that's really interesting in policy terms, and it's a really different kind of challenge for local authorities. But what climate change also requires is for us to really think about the politics of the long term, contrasting that sense of here's an emergency, but we're talking about something that's very long term. And historically, that's something that British politics has not done well. We don't have strong mechanisms for dealing with long-term policy challenges. And so thinking about what we need to develop in policy and strategy terms, how we build and embed our response into our kind of processes and thinking for the long term, is something we're really having to work on. But also that this is climate change really requires us to think about the politics of trade-offs. This is not a kind of win for everything. The scale of changes that we are going to need to significantly reduce carbon is going to require trade-offs. And in boroughs like ours, which have a really strong history and culture and practice around thinking about inequality, that is part and parcel of how we think about climate change. We need to work out what are going to be the impacts of climate change measures that we want to introduce, what impacts is it going to have for different people, and how do we think about that, and how do we have that conversation about trade-offs openly. And that requires a different way of doing politics to the way we have done before. And similar to Camden, actually we were due to very shortly launch a citizens' assembly and a series of associated engagement measures with different groups to try and do that work in the open, to share our evidence, to share our thinking, to share that role of governance more broadly between members, our elected members, the wider public, to say, here's our challenge, here's the evidence, let's do this openly, and let's come up with some solutions together. So the next thing is really this leadership challenge, and I put this graph on the right just to give you a sense of the breakdown around carbon emissions in Lambeth, a little bit different to Camden, but you'll see a kind of similar pattern around the kind of sectors that generate our carbon emissions. And the key thing to point out that is, our sort of our working is that the council accounts for around 3% of those carbon emissions. So really, if we want to make significant kind of changes around carbon emissions, we need to think about who's in that other 97% and how do we build the partnerships, the relationships, that long-term commitment to bring around change. That's a different sort of kind of way of approaching an issue, starting with that bigger picture. But the really important bit for us is to get our own house in order. And we don't have credibility to provide leadership on this unless we can really show what we're doing around our estate and operations to move toward carbon neutrality. So like other boroughs, working really hard to set out some plans about how we're going to reach carbon neutrality by 2030, looking at things like our procurement policy. So how do we start to bring our supply chain with us? Thinking about things, particularly in relation to our own role as a developer, got a new development organisation, Homes for Lambeth, looking at their work programme over the next 10 years, and actually how we're using their role to demonstrate across the sector how we build zero carbon homes, how we really improve the quality and the sustainability around social housing. Work around kind of green energy, so making sure that our supply of corporate energy is green, and looking also at our kind of community energy projects and working with partners around some of those things. And data and publication of data, transparency around that is really important part of kind of doing this work differently. But I think that thinking about that 97%, that other part of the picture there, we've got some amazing partners in our borough. We have huge hospital trusts, we've got 2 universities, we've got housing associations, developers who are really committed and engaged to this. But what can we do together? So actually our steering group from our Citizens' Assembly is led by that range of partners from kind of faith organisations, civil society, private sector, public and elsewhere. And that's really just starting, but already there's, I think, a commitment to see how we can really push that as far as possible in developing a shared action plan as well. So, I mean, just finally to say that climate change, I've worked on a sort of range of policy areas, and it's not like other policy areas. The kind of demand to cut carbon feels really simple, but it is not a simple issue. And I think even just thinking about us for an organisation, I need almost every part of our business to think about their contribution to a climate change response. And there isn't new funding or new money for this. So what that means is that our carbon strategy needs to think about how it's delivering a range of other outcomes, and be that around kind of social isolation, or increasingly thinking very urgently around kind of economic recovery or health and well-being. Climate change cannot stand alone. It needs to kind of intertwine with that range of other outcomes. And so what that means is that we need people who can work very differently. So one of my core focus at the moment is to try and kind of build the team that has the skills, the abilities, the toolkits to work in that kind of systems way. And to think about, if we think about some of the most significant carbon reductions aren't necessarily going to come from our direct interventions. So we need to think about taking our enabling role an awful lot more seriously. So things like publication of data, and not just for us as an organization, but right across our kind of partnerships and supply chains is going to be really important. Thinking about our policy, things like our local plan, how do we push that as far as possible? Thinking about our convening power as a local authority. Those are things we need to take really seriously. So enabling others to change is probably where we need to equally put weight, as well as our own programs.
Brilliant, thank you, Hannah. That's fantastic and really interesting. I've not thought about before the fact that you need people with different skills and a completely new way of working. So that's really interesting. Thank you. We're going to move quickly on to our next presenter, Gareth. So you've stopped sharing your screen. Gareth, if you could share your screen and tell us about what you've been up to in Hounslow. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, and thanks for having me here on this virtual panel. So to just give you a bit of a sort of brief history of the key dates in Hounslow. So it was just under a year ago that we declared a climate emergency. So we committed to reviewing the arrangements in place to reduce the council's carbon footprint, and also identifying measures towards a goal of making the council's activities carbon neutral and ultimately zero carbon in the shortest achievable timeframe. Anyone eagle-eyed will have noticed that we showed us no data on one of the earlier slides, but we did actually say 2030 in a subsequent document. So then in the last summer we developed a corporate baseline. We got an environmental consultant to help us with that, and also had a staff engagement and a public engagement event to feed ideas into what they were helping us with. And so then it was December that we actually drafted our climate emergency action plan that was subsequently approved for consultation in January of this year. And that consultation is still ongoing. It's open for just over another week, and we managed to sneak 2 public events in there just before we went into lockdown mode. So this pie chart here will shows you the direct emissions in Hounslow, so a little bit different than the pie chart that you saw in Hannah's presentation before. And what this shows, something that Harold mentioned, is that the overwhelming sort of challenge that we're faced with here is gas. So 79% of our emissions are gas, which so electricity is a long way behind in second place on 17%. So of that 79%, 17% of that is the Hounslow Council's corporate estate, 18% is our schools, and then the sort of biggest opportunity to make a change with that is that 64% of it is our council-owned housing stock. But again, this is something that sort of previous presenters have talked about, is what about the other 95%? So I think it would be 97% potentially in Lambeth, but we're working on the 95% figure. And we're still kind of wrestling with how far we can go and how influential we can be as a good steward for the wider borough stakeholders and citizens. So at the moment, you can see we've got a few. This is just a screenshot from our Hounslow Matters quarterly publication, which was an environmentally themed issue last month. And it shows three of the 6 programmes where we've kind of said what the council's going to do. So to take one from my sector, we've said that we're going to switch the council's fleet to electric vehicles. But then what our ask is of the wider public as well, which in that case is if you need a car, then please switch to an EV when it's time to replace your vehicle, or even better, give it up and use a car club. So as I say, the consultation is ongoing. It is challenging, and I think most consultations around kind of complex policy issues are. and you know, despite this being so important and an emergency, it is still a challenge. You can see at the top, that was where I advertised one of the our events on Nextdoor, so don't tell our comms team I accidentally left the comments enabled, and you can see that straight away we got somebody saying that, you know, until India and China get working on this, maybe we're just wasting time and money in Hounslow. But really, the sort of the bigger challenge, because we did get a lot of, you know, a lot of positive feedback throughout. The bigger challenge is just kind of getting the numbers engaged across the borough. So our main consultation page to date, we've got 68 responses, or 150 if you include the schools one. Well, I've been running a parking consultation on a residents' parking scheme that's been almost exactly the same dates, and we've had 450 responses to that. So it kind of just gives you an idea of the challenge. But there are some real positives. The events were well attended. You know, fantastic range of ideas that were brought in there. A very engaged sort of community, and the schools in particular. We've done a lot of work with our schools already, and our youth parliament, this was the first time we've kind of done the bespoke consultation aimed at the schools, and you can see that we've had more responses to that than we have to our other page, which, you know, completely flips around what we normally have with consultations, where you get the older age groups absolutely dominating the feedback numbers. So you know, given the particular nature of this challenge and the fact that that group of people that you can see at the bottom right of the screen are the ones that will be most affected by climate change, I think that is encouraging and something that hopefully we can try to build on. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Gareth. Interesting to see some similarities, obviously, with the other London boroughs, but some extra challenges or new challenges that you have. So I'm going to invite you to stop sharing your screen, if that's all right. And now we're going to move from the London boroughs to Optivo Housing Association. So if I can ask Diana to share her screen. Thank you, Diana. Here we go. Brilliant. Okay. Tell us about what you've been doing over in Optivo.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to attend the panel. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the housing associations are doing to address climate change. And firstly, we had an energy and environment strategy that was formed 2 years ago. We did full consultation on it that involved residents, but it's already out of date. There have been so many seismic changes within the sector, new legislation coming out, which means that although it was a good document for its time, it's already sort of something that really we need to renew as soon as possible. So we're working on a new strategy at the moment. We've produced a roadmap to 2050 and how we're going to get there. Most of our impacts come from our housing stock. We have 47,000 homes, large number in London and the South East, but also the Midlands. And what we're trying to do is map out over a period of time from 2025, 2030 to 2050, what we need to do in order to decarbonise and reach the 2050 net zero target. We also have SHIFT, which is a KPI system for housing associations. It measures our performance in 22 key areas and benchmarks us against other housing providers. And at the moment, we're rated second out of 40. So doing okay, but always room for improvement. We also have the UN SDGs, which we're just about to start making a commitment to doing, like many local authorities. This puts our activities in their global context. It also helps to attract new talent to our organisation, and also funding as well. The funding houses and banks are now looking to see how we evidence our continuous improvement towards net zero carbon, and therefore having the SDGs and having other KPIs like the ESGs give us an opportunity to show how we're performing and whether we're investable or not. We have a strategic plan, which is at the moment going up to 2025. In that, we have a target to achieve 80% of our homes reaching EPC Band C by 2025. However, it's almost already out of date because this was based on the Fuel Poverty Act. And since then, we've had the net zero carbon, and we almost need to be doing better than that by 2025 to achieve our 2050 target. So it kind of, running to catch up the whole time. We're also trying to help some of our colleagues because you probably know already that there's a ban on gas heating as from 2025 for new developments. So we can't just do business as usual. We have to look at installing renewables and other non-gas forms of heating. So we're actually working with our development managers to help retrain them so they understand what's required to install things like communal ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps. In terms of quick wins, energy data is actually almost like a quick win for us because we've got plenty of homes which have old EPCs or where we've inherited stock from other housing associations that don't have energy data. So just by embarking on a big stock condition survey, which would cover all of our properties over the next 3 years, we hope to improve our energy data. And that will enable us to understand exactly where we are in terms of our route and our roadmap to 2050. Other people have mentioned their fleets. We've also done a fleet review. We're looking at savings from our grey fleet and also from our DLO, where we can actually start to make some cost cuttings as well as actually reducing our carbon emissions. Whole house retrofits is something that we do a lot of. The idea that it's not necessarily a quick win when you're doing the work, but it does mean that you don't have to go back and do further measures later on. So we do multiple measures for each retrofit that we do to improve the energy rating of those properties. We also need to build to a higher energy rating. So SAP is like an energy measure. And based on our roadmap, we already need to be building homes that reach EPC band A, which is SAP 96. So that's a massive challenge for us. It's going to be significant cost involved in that. And also we need to find better ways of measuring how our new properties are performing. We also do GIS mapping, which is a quick way of looking at analysing our stock, looking at clusters of poorly performing homes, flood risk, areas where we've got green spaces and how we capitalise our green assets, if you like. And we also have a tree app as well now. In terms of behaviour change, like my colleagues in the local authorities, we have a number of internal and external ways of communicating. We have a magazine connected. We're doing a webinar next month for our staff on electric vehicles to give them some information about what they could and could not be buying. We're also working on IoT, Internet of Things. So we have an Optivo Futures group, which is currently looking at smart technologies and ways that we can work with our residents in a better way. And talking of residents, in terms of internal and external stakeholders, we run retrofit roadshows to help our residents understand the new technologies that we're installing in our homes. They've been very popular. We get our consultants and our contractors to come along and actually talk directly to the residents about the equipment that we're installing so that they fully understand what they're getting. We've got residents panels who are trying smart technologies and then giving us feedback, which has been quite interesting. We've fitted switches in a number of our properties and they've been giving us feedback on how they work, so we can send them messages through the smart technology, do remote boiler tests through our smart technology as well. So it's giving us, a landlord, lots of information about how our properties are performing. And then external stakeholders, we work with local housing associations in London, in the wider country as well. There's something called the G15, which is our sort of inner group for London, and we're working with them at the moment to really figure out what decarbonisation means for the housing sector, because it's, as everybody else has said, it's a massive undertaking. We don't even really know what that's going to cost us at the moment. So we're working with our colleagues to try and fathom out, what our next steps are as a group. And we also partner with councils, and we'd love to continue doing that. So if anybody's listening today that wants to partner with a housing association on decarbonisation, we would love to hear from you. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Diana. If you could stop sharing your screen now, and it's nice to hear that kind of shout out to other boroughs who might want to work with you, because I think we're all in this together, aren't we? So it's really important that we just catch up with my slides. that we can work together. So sorry, I'm just okay, so now we've invited Bevan Jones, who's associate at Greengage, to do a summary and to take some reflections in terms of what he's heard from the first panel. So Bevan, over to you.
Yeah. So yeah, obviously local authorities is a sector close to my heart because I started my career there, and I think there is some really different takeaways from each one. So I'm just going to run through them in order. So from Harold's one, Harold and Camden, what we got, or what I got, was very much that you know, there was a great slide that Harold had there on the impact of the community on their planning and some of the ideas that came up, and I thought that was really central, and I think that's always been a strong part of Camden's sustainability and climate approach. But just seeing that slide of the impact of community involvement in terms of the initiatives that have come up, I think that's really important in terms of climate emergencies and local authorities trying to deal with this. I thought Hannah's 3 challenges kind of sum that up really well, and particularly I think, you know, we're well aware of political, we're well aware of some of the leadership challenges, but in particular that systems thinking and that need to think of a systems approach when you're doing this, I think is really key, and it's something that councils really need to kind of grapple with, and it'll lead on to a question that I was going to ask the other panel, but I think I'll ask this panel in a minute. From Gareth, I thought what was really great there was understanding the scale of the challenge and people's attitudes towards it and what they prioritize, and in particular the point around young people and their concerns around the environment. And I think often what we think about in terms of local politics and local issues, we have a certain demographic in mind, or we have a certain group of people in mind who may shout the loudest, or who are traditionally the ones who are most engaged. And actually what climate has done is it's engaged a different demographic of people in local politics and local administration, which I think is one of the key parts of this. And then Diana, just a different organisation completely. Optivo, they've got a different challenge. They're a national organisation. They're huge. They spread Kent, West Midlands, London, you know, massive organisation. I thought what came through there was 2 things from Diana's. One was the power and the need for KPIs and measuring and managing that performance, and understanding where your impact is. And particularly that needs to be backed up by data, which is something that anyone who's heard me talking about carbon reduction is a topic close to my heart, is the need for good data. I think in terms of reflecting back in the work that Greengage has been doing, particularly with Enfield, is that data thing is key. Lots of large organisations, lots of local authorities, lots of private sector organisations have access to all of this data, whether it's your energy data, whether it's your travel and transport data, your mileage claims or your insurance claims. This is really powerful data, and I think what organisations need to do is learn how to harness that data so that it is in a climate context or a sustainability context, rather than just data which helps you run the business on an everyday basis. The other thing we've been doing with Enfield is trying to bottom out these Scope 3 emissions. They're really difficult, and one thing we try to look at is including Enfield Council's housing stock in that Scope 3 emissions calculation. That really isn't easy, but it's a challenge that all local authorities, I think, really need to face up to, and anyone who manages any type of kind of portfolio of housing stock, they really need to start looking at this and getting over that challenge. And I think lastly, it's around offsetting. This is something we tried to tackle, well, we tackled early on. It's not just with Enfield, but with some of other Greengage's other clients, is let's talk about offsetting up front, because it's it did used to be quite controversial. People saw it as kind of cheating. I think now people definitely see it as part of the solution and of how you get to net zero, and actually having a robust, meaningful, measurable offsetting approach is really key to all of this. And I think everyone's trying to grapple with that in a minute. I think I will finish there, but my one question, and this was kind of
go for it,
spurred on, was what are the skill sets that are going to be needed in housing associations, public sector organisations, local authorities, in order to get us to that net zero economy?
Who would like, raise your hand if you want to take that question.
It's a really simple one to start off with, I thought. Sorry.
Really? Hannah, you talked about skills, so Hannah and then Harold.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start the ball rolling and others might want to build on it. But I suppose the things that are front of my mind at the moment are people who have got really strong skills in thinking about how to develop collaboration and partnerships. I think that's going to be critical. People who have got a really strong sense of data and understanding data, but also thinking about how you use that data to enable other people to bring about change. And I think alongside a kind of a set of skills in those areas, I think there's a set of behaviours. And I think the political challenges mean that we need people who are very comfortable working very transparently and openly, who are comfortable about receiving that challenge. And if I can just give an example, we published our corporate carbon reduction plan in July, on the council website. Extinction Rebellion got hold of the report, sent it out to their networks, and within about a week, I had a set of comments back from a range of university academics working in the climate field with detailed comments back on the report that we had published. That's amazing from a policy perspective, but it's a very different way of working, and you have to be up for working in the open, getting that challenge, looking to improve, and that's not something that's not a way of working that everyone's familiar with, and we need people who are comfortable working like that.
Okay, thank you. And Harold?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo the point about the skills, the sort of participation skills. You've got to bring the community along with you now more than ever, I think. But I was going to add, this idea about coalition building within organisation, within big institutions, which I guess is the point Hannah made too. In Camden, there's absolutely no hope if you've just got a sustainability officer working on their own trying to make this happen. You've got to have every major investment team in the council working alongside you, and you've also got to be able to seize opportunities. And I think with COVID, the end of COVID, there's going to need to be a kind of economic renewal. So how do we use the economic renewal moment to bring in some of the environmental issues too, to ensure that uplift is as green as possible? And that requires finance departments working with investment teams too. So coalition building, a big theme, I think.
Okay, thank you. I'm quite keen for us to be able to take some questions. We've got loads and loads of questions that have come through from everybody watching. So the first one is to Gareth, and this is from Richard Dudiziki, architect at RDA. Your comments of awareness is important, especially with the younger generation. I think a lot of this is to do with teaching that there are possibilities without cost to the younger generation. How are the councils engaging with case studies and examples, particularly with housing, which seems to be young people's highest levels of anxiety, particularly in providing a zero carbon outcome? So how are you working with the younger generation, I think is the key question here.
Yeah, that's a good question. I did have a quick flick through all the sort of responses to that school survey yesterday, and I think there are quite wide-ranging concerns. I wouldn't say housing sort of popped out, more than things like single-use plastic use and putting solar panels on schools. Lots of sort of great contributions. I think what struck me is that there's a lot of the ambition and kind of the and a lot of the anxiety fueled ambition is going to come from younger people who are going to want to challenge the status quo. But we kind of need to help them to help us, because when you're talking about people that are still at high school, okay, there's exceptions. Greta, I think would be one. But there's a lot of people that want to contribute, but they haven't necessarily got a full grasp of how local councils work and kind of some of the the technical challenges. And I think that stuff like what they've done in Camden with the citizens' assemblies and some more deliberative events where we can kind of rather than just putting a policy out there and speaking to the geography teachers and asking them to make sure that all of their students are filling out responses, I think that finding ways to work alongside the schools and alongside the young people and to really kind of give them the information that they need to then be able to get all of that energy and passion sort of as well informed as possible, I think will help us to go forwards with the kind of bold agenda that we need to tackle this challenge.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question that I think maybe is to everybody. So this is from Lauren Stabler from Anglia University. Homes England is looking at allowing developers to offset emissions by providing a budget to local Homes England is looking at allowing developers to offset emissions by providing a budget to local authorities for decarbonisation projects. Do you think that that's an appropriate approach? Yeah, so we go for Harold and then Bevan.
I think it can be really useful. Yeah, I mean, I think the example of Euston's interesting, where you have, you know, Euston Station, obviously going to be the terminus for High Speed 2, surrounded by some of the, you know, really big housing estates that need energy efficiency improvements. And, you know, is there a way of redistributing essentially the value from the Euston development into the local community? That feels like a good approach to offsetting, i.e. one where there is sort of a social value to it as well as a carbon benefit.
Bevan?
I would say yes and no. I think one of the things is that you need to be able to administer that. Local authorities, I don't think the financial situation for local authorities is going to change anytime soon. So you've got to be able to administer that effectively, and to administer that, you then have to be able to monitor that local offsetting, as it were. The other side is that obviously it's better to locally offset if you can prove that you are offsetting in a meaningful way, in a tangible way, in the local community or a local school. Well, an organisation might think that's great PR, but actually you can see those offsets locally. So I think that's the flip side of the argument. I would say that if we looked at houses and developments, all the kit that is getting put in houses now, especially in London, is not that far away from the kit that needs to be put in houses for it to be zero carbon. So for where we've got developers, that it's not a massive step. They've got enough time now to be figuring out how much that increases or decreases or stabilizes their cost per square meter. They've got enough time to be figuring out their supply chains in order to get that done. And I think that offsetting is going to be part of the mix, but like I said, it needs to be tangible, it needs to be meaningful, it needs to be measurable. Otherwise, we'll get people just taking the easy route. So, yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, we're going to have to draw that to a close because I really want to get on and give us enough time also to the second panel. So thank you very much, Hannah, Gareth, Bevan will come back, Harold and Diana. Thank you very much for your contributions. We're now going to move on to the second panel. So I'm just going to change my screen around, excuse me, which is about what can the wider built environment sector do to support climate change declarations. And again, we'll have Bevan doing a summary at the end. But we're going to kick off with Niles Raj from Landsec, who's actually joining us from France, Peter Beauville from Montague Evans, Rita Garg from Arup, and Tom Dollard from Pollard Edward Thomas Architects. So I'm going to now stop sharing my screen and invite Niles to tell us what you're doing and prioritising at Landsec. Thank you, Niles.
Thank you very much, Nicola. I'm going to share my screen. Good. Can everyone see this well? Good morning, everyone. So thanks very much, Nicola, for the introduction. So indeed, my name is Niels Raj, and I lead sustainable design in planning and construction for Landsec. So Landsec, we are one of the largest real estate companies in Europe. Our portfolio spans £13 billion and about 24 million square feet of workspace, retail, leisure, and residential hubs with a growing focus on London. But we also aim to lead our industry in sustainability, because climate change is the defining issue of our time. And the global picture is that in 2019, the world's carbon emissions continue to increase. Now, we've got 10 years to fundamentally shift away from carbon-intensive business models. And for us, it's really about de-risking our future. It's about reducing the risk to our business as we collectively shift a transition to a low-carbon economy. And we're taking this leadership position very seriously. So for the third year in a row, we're the only UK real estate company on the CDP A list for climate action, alongside companies like Unilever, Apple, L'Oreal, and more, that rewards companies for their leadership in climate actions, not only in real estate. We're also topping Investor Sustainability Benchmark, not only in UK, but across Europe too. So last year, we made a pledge to become a net zero carbon business by 2030. And in doing so, have put forward a 5-pronged approach to get there, with a clear reduction pathway addressing our operations and supply chains. It's an ambitious but credible strategy backed by climate science, and that shows that if we achieve it, we will have done our part in trying to limit the worst effects of global warming to 1.5 degrees. Now, having done this, what lessons can we derive about what all sectors can do to support local authorities in this common goal? Well, first, we need to ensure consistency in definitions. As we've heard, many local authorities are setting themselves net zero carbon targets, and so do many private sector organizations, which is absolutely fantastic. The scopes and timescales don't necessarily always align, and we first must focus on getting the definition right across the board to avoid any confusions and focus minds. And once we've got definition, a consistency in definitions, we ought to set out a clear plan to accompany the declarations, including step and milestones. And for this, I believe we must follow climate science to make credible reduction claims in line with the needed change in scale and pace. And one globally recognized way to do so is to set science-based targets, which are carbon reduction targets aligned with the ambition of the Paris Agreement. Now, Landsec was the first property company in the world to set such carbon reduction targets back in 2016, in line with the 2-degree scenarios in Paris. And we're very proud of having achieved this target last year already. And we've now just recently ramped up our ambition to align with a 1.5 degree target, which means we're now committed to cut our carbon emissions by 70% by 2030, having already achieved about half of this, which was our previous target. And we're talking absolute emissions. So the aim is to keep growing whilst reducing our footprint. And I believe that we need to see clear action plans that use a similar framework backed by climate science. Second, to set these plans, we also must align our areas of focus in the built environment. This is the first one for us, is to recognize the importance of embedded emissions. This is the elephant in the room that our industry must address. We must account for supply chain emissions and what it takes to build buildings. For new developments, which is my area of focus within Landsec, this is by far our largest emitter of carbon and a key focus of mine across our development pipeline. Each of our major developments setting embedded carbon targets and reduction assessments. Second area of focus for us is to reward energy performance in use as opposed to theoretical designs, which we're working on with the Better Building Partnerships on their pioneering Design for Performance initiative to deliver buildings that perform as intended. Now, importantly, public and private sectors can inspire each other in delivering better buildings. We can look at France, where all new public sector buildings must be built from 50% of timber or natural materials, which sets a precedent and a proof of concept, which can then be applied across the industry. Or in Australia, where the paradigm shift in energy performance of buildings led by the National Australian Building Energy Rating System, NABERS, rewarding performance in use, as we talked earlier, really started when government buildings mandated the scheme, and the rest of the industry followed. So when we have a common goal and definition and language laid out, then we must collaborate to get to this common goal. And the reason for this is that the effects of a warmer planet are already showing, and this is another thing that the past 12 months have really taught us. And because climate change will not stop at the red line boundaries of our side, nor at the boundary of one border to the next, we really must think long-term, collaboratively and holistically. And early engagement between the developers and local authorities is key to ensure that local needs are being met by a project in question. So you, Boro, have made a commitment, and we want to play our part in helping you get there. So what does that mean for us, and how can we help you get there? How can we better understand your specific needs so that we can tailor our answer? And so the earlier the conversation, the more the development can be shaped to meet the needs of the area and align with the long-term aspiration of the borough. And this is as true of social value as it is of environmental leadership, because social inequality is also a macro trend that we must address holistically. Just as a closing remarks, actually, I must say that we're really thankful to have the opportunity to have such conversations with local authorities. And it's very telling, actually, about how high the issue of climate change has risen on the agenda. So thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nils. That's fantastic. And again, a plea, obviously, to want to work with local authorities, which is great news. So now we're going to go to Peter Boville. Peter, if you could share your screen, please, and tell us what you've been doing at Montague Evans. Great, thank you.
Morning, can you see that?
Yep, we can see that. That's good.
Okay. Okay, good morning, Nicola, and everyone. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak today. I am a planning consultant, and I come to the issue of net zero carbon from your issue of setting these ambitions and indeed the climate change emergency that your local authorities and your politicians have set. And obviously I experience them where they meet the ground, and where we therefore have to deliver for you, for your politicians, and indeed for my clients. One thing I would say in that regard is that we can provide you in terms of what the private sector can give to local authorities is an experience of our global knowledge of these issues. And I give you an example here. The building, hopefully you can see on your screen there, looks super green. It's in the City of London, in the Square Mile. And it's a scheme that was recently at planning committee earlier in 2020. What I'm struck by with a building like this is that the politicians see that building and say, oh yeah, that is a green building that clearly must have environmental benefits. We're going to approve that. But for me, that then sets a fairly tough benchmark. Now, of course, we on this project, our architect has offices in Singapore, where they have clearly experience of climate change, and it's obviously a big issue in Singapore, and therefore they do have roof gardens, and they do have green buildings, but where their green experience is, and on this particular project, which I'm about to mention, is where the scheme that we've been trying to do is to put our green effects to the building at a horizontal level that can absorb the rainfall as it hits the building, and I would argue be a more practical aid to the flow into the utilities than this building is. It looks green, but the actual maintenance of it will be quite an arduous effect. Effectively, what we've seen in other buildings in the city of people having to hang off the side of this building to keep it alive effectively. So whilst it looks green, it may not necessarily be the greenest building that you've got. And therefore trying to persuade the planners on the one I'm showing on the screen now, of the building that we've been working on, a stone's throw from the previous example that I gave, has been quite hard, because your the members in the city have been saying to their officers with whom we've been having a dialogue, but it doesn't look as green. It doesn't look as green from the street as a member of the public walks past. And so I do think we have to interrogate and work. I mean, it's many of the points which have been made this morning, collaboratively, try to educate your members as to actually, whilst it's not just what you can see from street level. So in terms of what I think other matters that we can give to you, I think we can give you the experience that we've had working with different agencies. For example, one thing the planners, in my experience, focus on when I'm dealing with applications is BREEAM. What's your BREEAM score? Whereas our opinion is that BREEAM is quite an old, outdated scoring system. There's so many better ways of looking at how a building performs than merely what its BREEAM score is. Yes, you have to have a BREEAM certificate by definition, but there's a UK GBC, there's WELL buildings, there's LETI as well. So, and obviously there's lots of organisations such as the RIBA who can provide an insight and give you that experience that I would encourage you to call upon. We can provide, as a result of that, CPD for your members and indeed for your officers in terms of the experience that we've had, indeed case studies, whether they be ones in the United Kingdom or elsewhere. We can share our best practice and experience with you. And I would suggest that some of our models can be more advanced than some of your models. And so that was a point that Niels was just making. We can use our experience on things that have actually been built, and we can use our models to interrogate, and we've been doing so, how your policies and indeed forthcoming policies would have affected the building of, for example, the walkie-talkie. It's now built, it's now operational, it's now up and running, and we've got the data for how it performs as a building. And then we can help, I think, you with your policies as to how you can shape those, and how we can, through the lens of existing projects which we've already built and are operational, show you how that would have impacted. So we'd be very keen to help local authorities work with those policies. And we also have to recognise that all local authorities are different. They have different priorities. For some local authorities, their priorities will be flood risk. For others, it will be utility infrastructure capacity. Others, it will be lack of biodiversity. So we certainly have to recognise as a private sector that not all local authorities are the same. But I think, again, a point that Niels made is that it's imperative that we have an early dialogue and of a detailed nature with you to work and work collaboratively to build better buildings.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks very much, Peter. Great to be picking up on some of the issues obviously the other presenters have raised. So next we're moving to Ritu Garg, who's talking to us from Arup. If you could now share your screen, please, Ritu. Thank you. Over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good morning. So I'm going to be sharing some thoughts on what I think are important considerations to move towards zero carbon, specifically for transport. And although my focus is on transport, I think a lot of the points that I'm covering apply to a large degree across all different phases of the built environment. So here I'm highlighting 3 components that I think are key to developing the pathway to zero carbon transport. We need access to the right data so we can choose and identify the right targets, uncover the biggest opportunities, and ensure that we select metrics that adequately measure the performance of our strategy. We need to identify dimensions through which we can influence the trajectory towards reducing transport emissions. These dimensions might be behavioral, spatial, technological. How can we use our knowledge, resources, and power in these different dimensions to reduce emissions from transport? Lastly, we need a clear specification of roles and responsibilities, who does what. So what is the role of different levels of government? What is the role of the private sector? And who are the most influential stakeholders? What accountability, who holds accountability at every stage of the process? So transport planners often talk about the fact that transport is the means to an end. But for some reason, when we start thinking about a emissions reduction or zero carbon strategy for transport, we start to focus on specific modes. We start to think about roads, rail, aviation. So in a way, we carry forward constraints around how we currently operate and make decisions into a future where we already know we need a vastly different framework for making decisions. An effective strategy needs to be structured around an understanding of the drivers for demand. It needs to use this understanding to understand what are the key focus areas, who are the most important stakeholders, and what are the measures needed to progress the zero carbon agenda. Short-term needs and long-term priorities need to be addressed at the same time, and this is particularly relevant in the context of what's happening today. What's happening today is an extreme example of how there's always this tension between immediate needs and long-term priorities. A realistic strategy towards moving towards zero carbon needs to have the capacity to address ongoing disruptions and immediate needs while still ensuring that emissions reductions is always prioritized. So while moving towards and creating and developing this comprehensive integrated carbon strategy is likely a long-term process and complicated, that doesn't mean that action today is dependent on the finalization of this long-term strategy. We are already aware of a whole host of long-term measures or of near-term measures around sustainable transport, but these measures haven't been implemented fully. And that's because they're held up by business as usual constraints around funding and decision-making. So while we've declared climate emergencies, we've made commitments towards net zero, there is still a need to address and overcome this disconnect on what we prioritize and how we empower government or the private sector to take action on necessary steps right now towards moving towards zero carbon. And that's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Ritu. Right, we're going to try and keep to time, so thank you for that. If you can stop sharing your screen, and then we'll move to the last presenter, Tom, from Thomas Edwards Architects. So Tom, if you could share your screen now.
Hello everyone, good morning, thanks Nicola. Really delighted to be here today to talk from an architect's point of view. I'm from PT, we're architects based in London, so we did a lot of work in London with all the London boroughs. This is next slide is a reminder of the question, it's really just to say there's a simple answer, which is we need to design and deliver new and refurbished places that meet and exceed this policy. So that sounds very simple, but I think it's a lot more difficult in the detail. So I'm going to give you 3 points to answer, provide a bit more detail on that question. First, we need to do research. And this slide shows how we can do that. So there's a number of pieces of research that PT has done with the Zero Carbon Hub. From the Builders Book back in 2014, following performance gap research, through to the Services Guide. And currently we're working with the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy on the Building for 2050 project, which is looking at how we build new low carbon homes at an affordable cost. And then there's a number of other guides there that I've written. The Design to Form book is a fantastic guide for clients and really non-specialist people to give you a background into energy performance and how to deliver real performance on your projects. And then the CIBC Good Practice Design for Homes is then really good. And what we're trying to do with these is to dig underneath the policy and provide some clear guidance, practical guidance that design teams can deliver on real projects. The next slide is showing really the most obvious way to respond to this policy is to deliver developments to them. So at PT, we are we've delivered almost 1,000 zero carbon homes in the last few years. Most of them have been in Cambridge, where there's a very high policy there, working on local authority and university land. So this sustainability strategy is an image showing that one of those projects. But I think it's really key that we don't wait for policy to come along, and we as professionals, built environment professionals, push that agenda, and we offer the opportunity for clients to go to net zero before policy. And what we've been trying to do at PT is ensure we provide a sustainability strategy for all projects at REBA stage 2, at least as an option, even if the client doesn't want to go ahead with that net zero strategy. And then the final thing we can do is demonstrator projects, and we need to be sharing these projects in very open, transparent ways, with all the data there as much as possible. So I think the Building for 2050 project is one I'm leading for. I'm leading the technical reviews for BAYS. There's a video on that website I didn't have time to play today, but it's only a couple of minutes long, so I'd encourage you to go and have a look at that project. And there's some great case studies there across London and the UK, and those images are of Marmalade Lane in Cambridge and a project by Galliard Homes in Leighton. And there's one of our own case studies, Vrido Concept House in Cambridge, which was zero carbon, and we monitored that for a year. So I think the next level of detail really is and how can we achieve this on our projects? What we're doing at PT is we've got 3 priorities. We realise that net zero is policy now. But before we think about new builds, we want to consider the retrofit first, and life cycle, carbon and cost. If we have to build new build, it should be passive house, and then plus renewables after you've dealt with the fabric, and we want to monitor. And this idea of data is absolutely key. We need to know where we are on our existing stock, and our new build needs to be monitored in use. And then finally, my final point is really to say that net zero is just the start of this conversation. We need to be looking beyond carbon, beyond net zero. Net zero is really just 100% worse. 100% better than bad. It's not actually doing any extra good for the site. We want to look at regeneration, regenerative design, and looking at wider benefits of that across health and well-being, good indoor air quality, less crime, and happier and more joyful places. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. If you could just stop sharing your slides now, or stop sharing your screen, that would be great. And I'm going to hand over to Bevan, who's going to give us a very brief summary and reflect on what he's heard.
I think, yeah, really, it's amazing how much you can get out of 5-minute presentations. I think that's, I just filled this page with notes. I think what actually has come through all of the presentations is performance and performance monitoring. And actually, you need to know how these things perform. I think that's a really important point. It's often neglected in the built environment. It's often not specified in projects. And actually, it saves us from reinventing the wheel every time we come across a new scheme or a client drops a tender on our desk. So I think that was something that's come out of all of them. Just quickly, Nils, I think the message I got from there was consistency, credibility, alignment. I think that's really important message in terms of when you're setting your carbon goals and when you're actually going to manage those goals. Peter, it's a really spot on thing that local authorities that live in a resource constrained world can actually learn a lot from their consultants, a lot from the people who do work for them, and we're there to help with that, and we're there to offer that advice and that insight from other projects that we learn from. Rita's presentation, what I loved about that is the kind of this issue that we will all experience of grappling with short-term priorities and long-term aspirations, and how you manage those two things together on this journey. And that's even just within the sustainability sphere, where today it might be, well, let's switch to 100% renewables, and actually the long term is, well, we need to dramatically reduce the carbon from these buildings. And I think also, what Rita said there about data and influence, I think that is really those 2 points are really important too. Tom, again, performance that we said, but that point around let's not wait for policy. We know what zero carbon is, we know how to do it, so let's start talking about it with our clients. Let's start saying, well, let's figure out how we do this for the same cost, or let's start thinking about this long term. You've got enough leading time to this project to get it down to a good level of cost per square meter, or whatever you want to talk about. So I think there are some really important things there, that this is the time for local authorities or other public bodies to really turn around to their consultants and say, help is one, but also what new ideas have you got? What innovations do you have? And where can you possibly give us some insight into some new learning that we have? And I think, again, Greengage's work with all our clients, private and public, is we do try and bring in that other learning, because there are sometimes some very relevant things which aren't instantly applicable, but which can be brought to a client, and where they might not see the instant link, it may well have a long-term benefit. So yeah, I think definitely for that. I do have some questions, but I noticed you've got quite a few questions there, and I think it's probably worth getting through those rather than mine. So.
Yeah. Okay, thanks ever so much, Bevan. So we're just going to go straight to the question. Let me just move my slide on. So on the back of that point, actually, Bevan, this is a question from Peter Maxwell from the London Legacy Development Corporation. Data collection and analysis has been a recurring theme, but there are often issues of commerciality and confidentiality. So how can the private sector pool its knowledge, collaborate and share this learning publicly? And that's initially to Peter. And
yeah, it's an interesting one, Nicola. I mean, I'm sure there must be ways of anonymizing the information which is provided. There are issues to do with commerciality, not least of which, because you're charging the tenant a service charge, and therefore you want to be clear as to how efficient the building is running, and there'll be issues to do with copyright and what have you for the manufacturers of this information. But there definitely are ways, I believe, of being able to share information. The way that I would share it most, the one that came home to me whilst I was writing this presentation, was talking to people who've been developing other buildings in the city, and they're saying to me, we would love to share information with the city, on a specific basis, just to give them an example as to how that policy would have ended up had we followed that route with this result, and why we could go down a different route. So I think where it's shared sensitively and confidentially, then there are definitely ways of doing it. I don't suppose we'd necessarily want it to get out to everyone to see, but we're more than happy to share it with the local authority to show them, if you do X, Y comes out.
Yeah. So Tom, I think you wanted to come in this, and I don't know, Nils, whether you also wanted to comment. Okay, so Tom and then Nils.
Yeah, I think it needs to go beyond that. I think we need to really get to grips with this idea of confidentiality being an issue. I think it's tricky, but there's a couple of online platforms that are starting to do that. So Carbon Buzz has been around for a while. Sibsi and Reba platform ask people to share their data, and it's all made anonymous data. You've got the project, but you haven't got individual homeowners, things like that. That's really useful to get an idea of as-built performance. And then our Building to 2050 project is starting to do that with 5 pioneering case studies across the UK. So, and that's been a challenge, but what I'd say is you need a proper framework for that. You need to be working in an academic framework. So we're partnering with a number of universities, UCL, Leeds Beckett and Oxford Brookes. And Oxford Brookes and Leeds Beckett have set up online platforms before that anonymizes data, and they have to go through the whole ethics thing as well. So we can get more and more developers working to provide their information onto that online platform. That would be fantastic.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Nils, did you want to come in on that point about sharing?
Yeah,
data?
so just to add to that, I think it's a really relevant question. And well, first of all, there's I must say most of what I'll say at the moment applies to commercial offices, which is really our areas of focus at the moment. They are different. We definitely need to be more cautious with domestics. as Tom just pointed out. But well, first, there's a lot that's being done already. We are feeding a lot of information through public databases like the Better Building Partnerships Real Estate Energy Benchmark (REEB). That is then used to pull out insights about how is the private sector's commercial office performing. But I definitely think that that transparency in actual performance is an absolute key parameter that we need to drive this agenda of net zero building forward. That's things that the UK Green Building Council, recognizing the definition of a net zero carbon building, we need to be able to put this actual performance out there. And that's actively what we recognize through the Design for Performance scheme that we are pursuing, which does include a declaration of performance. That's really for us an own measure of success, to be honest, to understand how is it really performing, as well as being able to demonstrate, one, to our tenants that, to our tenants, to our leasing markets, that these spaces perform as they should. And when you do that, you're able to, use this as a proxy for asset quality, which drives, a series of co-benefits. And it's about accountability to our investor base as well, to be able to demonstrate that these things perform as they should. So I really think that we need more transparency in this.
Okay, thank you. Just to keep us to time, I'm just going to ask one more question, which is actually to all of the panel. So this is from Safa from UCL. From your presentations, it seems like there is a pretty good understanding of how the private sector might begin to deliver against this, i.e. design net zero housing, net zero transport. The bigger challenge seems to be around behaviour change. So what are you doing within your organisation to promote the types of behaviour that can lead to better knowledge sharing, increased cross-sector learning and improved collaboration? So if you want to put your hand up, who would like to tackle that question first? Yeah, go for it, Tom. And then Nils.
Yeah, at PTE, it's not so much of a challenge for us. We're 160 staff in one office. So we have regular, well, up until recently, we had very regular meetings together as our group, CPDs, training. Friday at 4 we had, and the last Friday at 4 was how do we respond to this climate emergency at PT. And we've used our whole office systems to reduce our own carbon footprint. So you have to look at your own office. We've been doing our own carbon footprint for 10 years now, and we've reduced it massively. So it's about starting with your own organisation, and then looking for support. So 5 years ago, or actually more, we started partnering with the Green Register, and then the Good Homes Alliance, and obviously Future for London. We partner with yourselves, the key supporter of yourselves. And it's about then bringing in other experts, because we as architects don't have all the answers. We need to speak to engineers, planners, clients, obviously facilities managers and residents to increase that knowledge sharing. And organisations such as Future of London and Green Register as another training provider provide that sort of cross-sector learning.
Okay, thanks Tom, thanks for the shout out. Nils, did you want to come back on that as well?
Sure. So just to focus on what we're doing, just really within the organizations, it's crucial that we build this accountability on this. If we want to lead, it can't be something that is just the sustainability department. So a lot of what we're doing is effectively, first communicating clearly within the organization that these are the goals and here is what they matter to us. And again, educating people about the change in the interest from our investor base, I think has really opened a lot of eyes about, oh, actually, do people like, upstream care about this? Then therefore, it's not just something for the green, the sustainability team. So building that accountability across sectors and departments and setting them targets that they can understand. Be it on the embodied carbon of the developments, it now sits with our development teams. It's not just with me, it's really with them and help them deliver that, or with our operations team and they're helping them deliver our carbon reduction targets year on year.
Okay, thank you.
And Nicola, I would say that it goes through every piece of work that we do. Like what Neil said, it's our investor base, it's all our staff. But the other point I'd make is that when you're trying to be attractive to new staff and graduates and what have you, then they look at all these sorts of things when they are looking as to which firm they should be joining. So again, it's in our interest to promote these matters in any case, because it's one of the checklists that graduates have and staff have for coming to join a firm like ours.
Okay, thank you. Ritu, did you just want to have a final few words on that?
Thanks, Nicola. I'll try to be brief, but I think there are two ways of looking at this question. One is, what are we doing inside our organization? Arab has a commitment to get to net zero, and I work within a team of transport planners, and I think the challenge for us is not so much about our own behaviors, because everyone in my team loves cycling and walking, but I think the challenge is then, as experts, how do we translate our behavior onto a wider platform? And to do that, I think things we do is work across disciplines. So on a project involving creating a pricing scheme, we worked with our human factors team, who have psychologists within them. And we thought about not just price elasticities and how price affects behavior from an economic perspective, but also psychologically, what are the ways in which you implement a pricing scheme to actually change behavior, because it won't always lead to behavior change. So I think working across disciplines, also encouraging experimentation and trials, so things like Bike to Work Day, encouraging our staff to do that, and as well as our clients to have projects that feature that kind of experimentation, are ways to change behavior.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm going to have to draw it to a close. We've got loads of other questions that didn't, unfortunately, went unanswered. But what we're going to do is trying to use Twitter to answer those questions for you, so we can stay engaged and we can carry on the conversation there. I would like to thank our panelists, all of our panelists that we've had today, and Bevan as well, for bringing it all together. It's been fantastic to get your inputs and to hear all the different approaches, and we're going to take those through the programme. I have to thank our sponsors, obviously, Arup, Montague Evans, Landsec, and Paula Thomas Edwards, for supporting this programme. It's really important. Thanks to everyone that's joined us. So we got over double the people that we'd normally get in a room. So thank you very much for your participation, and hope you stay engaged with the programme over the next 9 months, which I think I've already given away anyway. But let's just show you what's coming up. So we've got some roundtables coming up in June, so we're going to continue the interviews and the research that we're doing, and take reflections on what people are interested in. So roundtables in June, we hope to be able to take you out to see some of the innovative projects that are actually happening on the ground in the summer. Sorry, I'm just trying to move my around. Sorry. I just can't move the piece. And then we've got the conference and another workshop on the 28th of October, and then we'll be pulling all of this together into a report at the end of the year. I also want to thank the team. Anna and Sophie have been working so hard behind the scenes, so thank you so much to those two and everyone else in the Future of London team that's made this happen. This is our first online webinar that we've run like this with panels, so we'd really appreciate the feedback as you come out of this as a feedback form. If you can tell us what you enjoyed and how we can improve, we'd really appreciate that. We'll be circulating a link to the recording of this session, so by all means do share that with colleagues who might be interested, and do get in touch with us if you're interested in getting involved in the programme. So just gone 2 minutes over, so I hope you've had a great morning, and hope to see some of you at future events. Thanks again to our panel. Bye.